In the summer of 1940, as Europe fell silent under the shadow of Nazi domination, the world held its breath. France had collapsed, the Low Countries had been swallowed whole, and Adolf Hitler stood at the height of his power, convinced that Britain, isolated, wounded, outnumbered, would soon collapse as well. But what he did not know, what he could not imagine, was that the next great duel would not be fought on land. It would unfold in the sky, where the fate of nations would hang on the steady hands of young pilots and the unbroken will of a people refusing to bow. This is the story of the Battle of Britain, and the long, terrifying nights that followed, nights that came to be known as the Blitz. By mid-1940, the map of Europe had become a testament to Nazi triumph. Poland had been crushed, Norway and Denmark had been taken, and France, proud ancient France, had fallen in just 6 weeks. To anyone looking from the outside, Britain seemed like the next inevitable domino. The British Army had barely escaped at Dunkirk, leaving behind tanks, weapons, and the sense that the storm was only beginning. The world wondered, would Britain surrender? Would they negotiate? Would they remove Winston Churchill, the man whose defiant voice thundered across the airwaves, promising victory at any cost? Churchill himself knew the danger. He once stood in the quiet corridors of power and whispered that if Britain fell, darkness would spread across the world. But he also knew something else, that the Royal Air Force, small as it was, determined as it was, still stood between Britain and catastrophe. And Hitler knew it too. That is why, even before invasion plans were drawn, he gave the order that the Luftwaffe must destroy the RAF, destroy them in the air, on the ground, break them before the German army crossed the Channel. Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, depended entirely on it, and so the battle began not with tanks or soldiers, but with radar screens flickering in small coastal stations, with the low drone of engines over the Channel, and with pilots scrambling from tiny airfields that were barely more than strips of grass. The Luftwaffe was confident. Fresh from victory, they believed they were unstoppable. Their bombers, Dornier, Heinkels, and the feared Stuka dive bombers, had torn through Europe with brutal efficiency. Their fighters, the Messerschmitt Bf-109s, were among the most advanced aircraft in the world. The German High Command believed the RAF would break in days, perhaps weeks at most. But what Germany underestimated was something far more powerful than technology. They underestimated the spirit, the resilience, and the sheer stubborn courage of those standing in their way. Britain was not ready for the kind of war that was coming. Many of the pilots who would soon carry the nation's hopes were barely in their 20s. Some were still teenagers. They came from farms, factories, universities. They came from across the Commonwealth. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. They came from Poland, Czechoslovakia, France. They were men who had lost their homelands, lost their families, lost everything, except the desire to fight back. They gathered under one flag, one sky, one impossible mission: stop the Luftwaffe. And so the days of summer 1940 became a roar of engines and gunfire. From dawn until dusk, formations of German bombers, escorted by sleek Messerschmitts, crossed the Channel like a steel tide. RAF controllers watched their radar screens, tracing the enemy's path, directing pilots to intercept. Across the countryside, sirens wailed, and high in the sunlight, where clouds shimmered like ghosts, young men fought battles that lasted minutes, but felt like lifetimes. To imagine what those pilots went through, you must picture the speed, the noise, the terror. A dogfight was chaos, planes twisting, diving, firing at each other in bursts so fast the human eye could barely follow. At any moment, a pilot could find himself targeted by an enemy he couldn't see. Many never knew what hit them. Many never had time to escape. But the RAF had weapons of its own, the nimble Hawker Hurricane and the legendary Supermarine Spitfire. The Spitfire, with its sweeping wings and elegant frame, became a symbol of hope, an instrument that could match the Messerschmitt in a deadly dance across the sky. And alongside these aircraft, Britain had another secret advantage, radar, a revolutionary system that allowed the RAF to see incoming raids before they arrived. It gave them time to scramble, time to plan, time to survive. Hitler had assumed Britain was weak, but day after day the RAF refused to break. Airfields were bombed, runways were cratered, pilots were lost. But every time a bomber formation approached, Spitfires and Hurricanes rose to meet them. Mechanics worked through the night, refueling, repairing, sometimes dragging damaged aircraft back to service with nothing but spare parts and determination. Pilots fought all day, slept little, and rose again at dawn, knowing full well the odds were against them. And yet they held. It was during this period that Winston Churchill spoke the words that would echo through history. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Those words were not exaggeration. They were simple truth. The survival of Britain, perhaps the survival of the free world, rested on the shoulders of a few thousand young men. But the battle was far from over. Hitler grew impatient. His commanders grew frustrated. The Luftwaffe had expected a quick victory. Instead, they found themselves locked in a grinding war of attrition. And then, like so many turning points in history, everything changed because of one mistake. A German bomber accidentally dropped its load over London. It was not part of a plan, not a strategic decision, just a single misdirected raid. But Britain responded by bombing Berlin. Hitler, enraged, abandoned his attacks on RAF airfields and ordered the Luftwaffe to target London and other cities instead. This decision, this single decision, may have saved the RAF from destruction. With the pressure on airfields reduced, the RAF recovered. Pilots were able to rest, regroup, reinforce, and though London now faced something far more terrifying, the British air defence still stood. And so began the Blitz. On September nights that should have been peaceful, the sky instead glowed red. German bombers came in waves, sometimes hundreds at a time, so many that Londoners said they sounded like an approaching storm. Air raid sirens wailed across the city. Families hurried into shelters. Children clutched the hands of their parents. Firefighters prepared for battles of their own, battles against flame, smoke, and falling debris. London burned. The docks were smashed. Whole streets disappeared. Landmarks that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. Night after night, the Luftwaffe returned, dropping so many explosives that the city seemed to tremble. And yet, Britain endured. The courage of ordinary civilians became as legendary as the bravery of the pilots above them. People emerged from shelters each morning to sweep glass from the streets, repair broken homes, share tea with neighbours, and carry on with life as if defiance itself were a weapon. Even as bombs fell, factories kept producing aircraft. Trains kept running. Children went to school. The message was clear. Britain would not break. The King and Queen refused to leave London. They visited bomb sites, standing among the rubble beside the same citizens who had lost homes, family, stability. And the greatest symbol of all was St. Paul's Cathedral, which stood tall through the flames, its dome illuminated in photographs that would later become iconic. As long as St. Paul stood, people said, London stood. The Blitz was not just an attack, it was a test of the human spirit, and the spirit did not falter. Meanwhile, in the skies, the RAF continued its relentless defence. As German bombers turned away from airfields and toward cities, British planes were able to intercept more effectively, wearing down the Luftwaffe. Pilots who had once been overwhelmed now found themselves fighting not just for survival, but for the chance to turn the tide. And slowly, surely, the tide did turn. By autumn, the Luftwaffe had lost thousands of aircraft and irreplaceable aircrew. Their planes were shot down over the Channel, over fields, over towns. Some pilots were rescued by German boats, many were not. The RAF, despite exhaustion, despite losses, had managed something extraordinary. They had prevented the Luftwaffe from gaining air superiority. Without control of the skies, Hitler's invasion was impossible. The great sea assault he had planned, the invasion of Britain, was postponed, then postponed again, and finally abandoned entirely. The Battle of Britain was over. The Blitz would continue for months, but the outcome was decided. Britain would not fall. Hitler had been stopped for the first time in the war. A dictator who had conquered nearly all of Europe now found himself facing an island that simply refused to yield. And the world noticed. Across the Atlantic in the United States, still neutral at the time, the courage of Britain stirred hearts. American support increased, supplies flowed, the seeds of a future alliance were planted. The German High Command never forgot the frustration of 1940. They had believed themselves invincible, but the RAF had proven them wrong. A small air force, outnumbered and outgunned, had defended their homeland against one of the most powerful war machines ever built. And the civilians, the ordinary people who had huddled in shelters, sung songs in the darkness, and rebuilt their streets each morning, had shown the world that courage is not just found on the battlefield. It is found in the quiet determination to keep going, day after day, even as the sky falls. The Battle of Britain was more than a military victory. It was a statement that freedom, when defended with conviction, can withstand even the most brutal assault. A statement that nations are not measured by their size or their weapons, but by their will. And so when historians look back at the Second World War, when they trace the long arc of events, the darkness, the destruction, the eventual dawn, they always return to the summer of 1940, to the weeks when Britain stood alone, to the young pilots who took to the skies, knowing they might not return, to the families who endured night after night of terror with unbroken resolve, to the moment when Hitler's unstoppable advance was finally halted. For in that moment the course of the war began to shift. In that moment the world began to believe that the storm could be weathered. And in that moment a small island became a symbol of defiance that still echoes through history. The Battle of Britain had been won. The Blitz had been survived. The fires of London had burned, but the spirit of its people had burned brighter, and the war, the long, terrible war, was far from over. But now, for the first time, there was hope.